My name is Miriam and I am 52 years old. I drove the morning school bus through Kittery for 26 years. Every single morning, I memorized the exact rhythms of every household on my manifest. I knew who was actually home. My sister Beatrice never drove a route in her life. She managed the family decisions from the living room couch. You only steer the wheel, so let the adults handle the real math, Beatrice said. I swallowed the insult and kept my eyes forward. The heavy metal drawers of the office filing cabinet waited quietly in the corner. They held papers I was never supposed to organize. Our father Vincent watched from his armchair without offering a word. He let the loudest voice win every single argument. The family ledger remained locked away in plain sight. I kept my daily schedules taped above the kitchen sink. Nobody thanked me for keeping the time. They expected me to absorb the cost without a word. That silence lasted longer than anyone cared to measure. Before we begin, please stay right here with me for a little moment. This is a quiet reckoning, not a shouting match. Miriam always knows how to wait out the clock on the road. Let me ask you to subscribe and join this journey. Look toward that heavy metal filing cabinet standing in the corner. Subscribe today to discover what rested securely inside it. Drop a very quick note in the section below to share your town. Every single morning shift starts quietly. I woke before sunrise. The old kitchen was very quiet. I checked the clipboard on the worn wooden counter while the small iron kettle heated up slowly for my morning tea. The morning route manifest listed 34 distinct stops across Kittery. Driving a school bus is hard work. You see things. Driving a large yellow vehicle every single morning teaches you how people actually live behind closed doors before the sun comes up. You learn who is awake when the loud horn blows. You notice the empty milk bottles left outside. People post polite stories. They talk about family harmony. The manifest tells a very different story entirely because it records the exact minute someone is late or crying or missing from the line. It does not care about refrigerator notes. My older sister cared about optics. Father watched from his chair. I just looked at the rows of names on my daily paper because names do not lie about who stands at the curb. That was my entire world. The kitchen table held our unwritten constitution. Beatrice laid down the terms before the coffee finished brewing. Vincent sat quietly by the radiator. He watched her gestures with tired eyes. As the sun crept across the worn linoleum floor, Beatrice announced that earnings belonged by custom to whoever held the loudest voice. My sister commanded the room. Her authority rested entirely on volume alone. She never drove a bus. She never checked a single morning manifest. While I prepared for another grueling shift on the road, my sister explained why my latest wages belonged to the collective pool. Father remained silent in his old chair. He never intervened when the household allocations were carved up by my older sister. Throughout 26 years of driving through the freezing county fog, I had learned to simply nod and keep my own counsel. The filing cabinet sat in the corner. Its heavy metal drawers held years of accumulated receipts. Each piece of paper documented a quiet injustice accepted without protest. Whenever the family needed money for an ambitious project, my modest earnings were treated as a public utility available to everyone. Normal households operated on mutual respect and shared burdens. Ours operated on loud proclamations and unchecked demands. Beatrice issued decrees from her worn velvet armchair. The unspoken laws of the house ensured that every single sacrifice I made was quietly absorbed into her personal treasury. The system felt completely permanent to everyone inside. Nobody questioned the established hierarchy of demanding voices. The quiet discipline I practiced every single day behind the wheel was the only real defense I possessed against their endless demands. Tomorrow would bring another stressful ledger check. More bitter arguments would fill the dining room before noon. Sitting in the driver's seat offered a quiet sanctuary where their demanding voices could never actually reach my ears. People outside the household saw a normal family. They noticed the neat porch and freshly painted shutters. Anyone who spent a single afternoon in our kitchen would quickly realize that fairness was merely a suggestion ignored by everyone. My earnings were never entirely mine to keep. They belonged by right to the loudest voice in the room. The small bound notebooks lived quietly inside my worn leather bag while the household debated how to spend my wages. The arrangement suited them perfectly for decades. It left me with empty pockets and heavy responsibilities. While he stared straight ahead at the paneled wall, I calculated the exact number of hours left before my evening shift. Control was maintained through routine exhaustion and steady pressure. I accepted the terms because I had no alternative then. Real patience eventually became my most reliable tool for survival against the overwhelming pressure of their shared household expectations. Morning light hit the dashboard. The engine hummed with predictable force. While the rest of the household debated my obligations over breakfast, I focused entirely on the road stretching out before me. Every stop brought new passengers. Their lives remained hidden behind closed doors. By the time I returned home tonight, the unyielding rules of the Ross household would still be waiting on the kitchen table. Beatrice walked into the kitchen with her clipboard raised. She dropped it on the worn wooden table. Her rings clicked against the surface. The heavy metal office filing cabinet stood behind her in the corner while the morning sunlight tracked slowly across the floor. Vincent sat in his usual chair by the window. He did not look up from his teacup. Beatrice wore her green wool coat from the winter market. She crossed her arms over the fabric. Beatrice cleared her throat loudly to command the room. "We simply had to adjust the ledger for unexpected administrative fees," Beatrice said. She tapped her pen against the paper. Vincent stared down at his saucer. His hands rested quietly on his knees. He stayed silent through every family discussion. I stood by the counter with my coffee cup. Beatrice turned the pages with a sharp motion of her wrist. She never liked questions about household expenses because they always threatened the careful story she preferred to tell everyone. "Your concerns are entirely misplaced today," Beatrice said. Her voice rose in pitch. She pointed the tip of her pen at my chest. I wiped the counter with a damp sponge. Vincent cleared his throat softly in the corner. He reached out slowly to adjust the fringe of the hand-stitched quilt on the sofa while the room remained tense. That quilt had belonged to our grandmother. Nobody else touched it without asking permission first. Beatrice ignored him entirely. "We have bills to pay right now," Beatrice said. She shoved the papers closer to my side of the table. I kept my eyes on the wet sponge in my hand. Vincent looked at the floorboards between his boots. He looked smaller than he had last year. Age had taken the authority right out of his shoulders and left him watching from the sidelines of every single argument. Beatrice tapped the corner of the desk twice. She expected everyone to nod along with her demands. I finished wiping the counter. The surface gleamed under the overhead bulb. Beatrice gathered her receipts into a neat stack. She tucked them into her leather satchel with a sharp snap. Vincent let out a long breath through his nose. He offered no defense for anyone in the room, while the morning hours stretched ahead toward another long driving shift. The heavy metal filing cabinet remained locked against the wall. Its contents stayed hidden beneath a heavy layer of dust. The paperwork stayed where she left it on the wood. I looked down at the figures scrawled in black ink. None of the columns matched my own mental tally that I kept running in the margins of every route manifest. Beatrice checked her watch with an impatient sigh. She grabbed her coat and headed for the front door. Vincent watched her leave without turning his head. The house settled back into its usual quiet rhythm. I picked up my clipboard and checked the time. There were 34 stops waiting on my morning list. Every single road demanded complete attention from the driver behind the wheel. Beatrice slammed the front door shut behind her. The sound echoed through the hallway walls. Vincent closed his eyes in his armchair. He rested his hands over the arms of the chair. I walked past him toward the mudroom door. The cold air outside promised a clear sky for the children boarding at the curb during the early morning hours. A bus route required patience above all else. Every parent expected their kids delivered safely on time. Beatrice understood nothing about those early routines. She only knew how to spend money she never earned herself while watching everyone else shoulder the daily burdens. My boots clicked against the linoleum floor as I moved forward. Beatrice stood by the kitchen table. Her coat was still buttoned against the draft. She dropped a heavy folder onto the wood. "You need to sign the release today," she said. I kept my hands flat against the counter. My fingers rested right over the edge. A bus route doesn't care who you pretend to be on the porch. It only cares who actually boards at the curb. I had repeated that line in my head for hours. Beatrice tapped her fingernail against the cover of the folder. Vincent sat in his usual chair by the radiator. He looked down at his slippers. He did not say a word to defend the logic of the house. In our house, whatever was gathered through steady labor belonged to whoever held the loudest voice. Those who kept the daily schedules absorbed the cost without a word. Beatrice folded her arms across her chest. "We have already discussed this 3 times, she said. I looked at the printed columns inside the folder. The numbers were neat and completely false. They bore no resemblance to the hours I spent driving 34 stops through the morning fog and managing the daily transit records. "You are moving the decimal points again," I said. Beatrice laughed without any warmth in her throat. "This is simply how the family accounts operate when adult decisions are required," she said. She waited for me to fold under the pressure. Vincent shifted his weight slightly in the armchair. The leather creaked in the quiet kitchen. He reached out and touched his knee with a trembling hand. Miriam should probably look over the remaining pages before she signs anything, he muttered. Beatrice turned her head sharply toward him. We do not have time for her to check every single receipt from the past 12 months, she snapped. The kitchen smelled of stale coffee and damp wool. I traced the grain of the worn wooden table with my thumbnail. My route manifest for the morning was still tucked safely into my coat pocket. On that paper, every passenger had a name and a reliable schedule. Here in the kitchen, the rules shifted to suit whatever outcome Beatrice wanted to manufacture for herself. You are making a mistake with these allocations, I said. Beatrice rolled her eyes toward the ceiling tiles. You always make things much harder than they need to be, she said. Vincent let out a long breath and stared back at the floor. The silence between us felt heavy and sharp. I did not raise my voice above a whisper. I just looked at the ink on the page. The file remained open between us on the table. Every column represented months of early mornings and quiet labor. Beatrice tapped her pen against the margin twice. I expect this signed and returned before tomorrow morning, she said. She turned on her heel and walked toward the front door. The latch clicked shut behind her. Vincent remained frozen in his chair, staring at nothing at all. I pulled the folders slightly closer to my side of the table. The paper felt slick and expensive under my fingertips. None of the figures matched the actual ledger entries locked inside the heavy metal filing cabinet by the door. I knew the exact cost of every line item she had altered over the past year. I kept my breathing slow and steady while the kitchen grew cold around us. The clock on the wall ticked forward through the afternoon light. Vincent finally pushed himself up from the armchair with a soft groan. He shuffled slowly down the hallway without offering another opinion on the matter. I sat alone at the wooden table for a long time. The empty coffee mug sat cold beside my hand. The bus returned to the gravel yard at midday. I turned off the diesel engine. The air brakes hissed softly into the empty lot. I hung my heavy wool coat on the wooden peg by the door, leaving the noise of the family far behind. The kitchen was entirely empty when I opened it. No coffee cup sat on the counter. No yellow notepad waited by the sink. Vincent remained in his usual corner chair. He looked toward the window instead of looking at me. That space had belonged to me for many years. A quiet boundary settled between us all without a single word. I walked past the table without stopping. The heavy metal filing cabinet stood firmly against the corner wall. Its green paint was chipped near the bottom drawer. I knelt down and pulled the brass handle toward me. The mechanism groaned softly in the quiet room. Inside, the metal slot smelled of old paper and dust. I placed a folded stack of route receipts into the rear compartment. Those papers documented every single mile of my working morning, keeping track of every detail that others chose to ignore. They recorded the exact times buses stopped at curbs across town. Nobody else cared about those numbers. They mattered only to the road and to the people waiting in the cold. I closed the heavy drawer until it clicked shut. From that afternoon onward, I brought more papers inside. The filing cabinet accepted every receipt and every shift log without a single complaint. Beatrice lived upstairs most of the time now. Her footsteps crossed the ceiling boards above my head at unpredictable hours. Sometimes I heard her voice shouting complaints through the vents. I did not answer her calls. I simply turned away and walked back to the metal cabinet. Each document found its proper place inside the dark drawers. People often think exile requires a dramatic departure across state lines, but mine was much smaller and much quieter than that. It happened entirely within the four walls of the kitchen corner. Vincent sat quietly in his brown chair day after day. He watched the light move across the worn floorboards. He never asked why I stopped sitting at the kitchen table with them. He understood the architecture of silence better than anyone else in the house, watching every movement without ever offering a word. The kitchen table belonged to whoever shouted the loudest demands. The metal filing cabinet belonged to me alone. I slid 24 distinct route reports into the locked drawer before evening arrived. Each report contained 34 separate entries detailing the morning passengers. Those lists were entirely accurate. They recorded truths that nobody else in the family bothered to acknowledge. Working a bus route leaves little room for hesitation or false assumptions. You see the genuine lives of families before the sun fully rises over the ridge, watching children grow up while bills pile up. You watch children grow up while their parents struggle to pay basic heating bills. Those daily observations accumulate inside a driver's mind like gravel in a tread. I stored the written proof of my labor inside the cold steel container. Beatrice could keep her yellow notepads on the wooden table. She could rearrange the household budget however she pleased. Her figures bore no relation to the actual work required to keep the engine running. I kept my own independent records tucked away safely in the dark. Evening fell quickly over the Kittery rooftops. The The street lamps flickered on against the gathering winter gloom. I poured hot water from the iron kettle into a plain ceramic mug. The steam rose in a thin spiral toward the ceiling. I sat down in the wooden chair by the corner. My hands felt steady and calm. The house remained entirely silent around me. Nobody came down the stairs to interrupt the quiet evening hours. The filing cabinet waited patiently in the dark corner, holding 24 years of quiet persistence within its heavy steel frame. I closed my eyes and listened to the distant hum of traffic on the highway outside. You are still here with me today. That matters deeply. Has anyone ever treated your quiet daily efforts as free property for their own use? Mine did for decades. You might wonder how a bus driver manages such an unbalanced route. The highway teaches patience, yet it also demands precise preparation. Every logged mile points toward a very specific destination. When our family ledger finally opens in public view, those numbers will reveal the truth. Drop a comment below and share your own story now. Winter mornings arrived with frozen windshields. I scraped the ice off the glass before every shift. The school bus engine idled in the dark driveway. Exhaust smoke rose in gray clouds against the fence. I clipped each route manifest to the visor above the wheel. Years accumulated in the hallway storage unit without a single interruption. The heavy metal office filing cabinet in the hallway collected folders month after month, without anyone else ever opening its locked drawers. Vincent sat in his usual corner. He held an empty ceramic mug across his palms. His digits trembled faintly upon the slick porcelain finish. Beatrice remained upstairs during the early hours. She slept off her nocturnal calculations in the master bedroom while the kitchen clock ticked steadily against the wood paneling wall. I pulled my jacket tight against the draft from the front hall. I placed the Tuesday fuel receipt inside the top drawer. The metallic yellow fastener rotated effortlessly within the mechanism. Beatrice walked down the carpeted stairs wearing her bright emerald silk robe while carrying a thick stack of yellow legal pads. She dropped the notepad onto the laminate table surface. She stated that we must examine the 3-month service sums prior to Friday morning. I adjusted the pen in my breast pocket. I finished checking the manifest totals for the morning run. Winter mornings arrived with frozen windshields. I scraped the ice off the glass before every shift. The school bus engine idled in the dark driveway. Exhaust smoke rose in gray clouds against the fence. I clipped each route manifest to the visor above the wheel. Years accumulated in the hallway storage unit without a single interruption. The heavy metal office filing cabinet in the hallway collected folders month after month without anyone else ever opening its locked drawers. Vincent sat in his usual corner. He held an empty ceramic mug across his palms. His fingers shook slightly against the smooth porcelain glaze. Beatrice remained upstairs during the early hours. She slept off her nocturnal calculations in the master bedroom while the kitchen clock ticked steadily against the wood paneling wall. I pulled my jacket tight against the draft from the front hall. I placed the Tuesday fuel receipt inside the top drawer. The yellow metal latch glided effortlessly within the mechanism. Beatrice walked down the carpeted stairs wearing her bright emerald silk robe while carrying a thick stack of yellow legal pads. She dropped the notepad onto the laminate table surface. We need to review the quarterly service totals before Friday morning, she said. I adjusted the pen in my breast pocket. I finished checking the manifest totals for the morning run. I nodded once. The yellow notepad stayed on the table. Beatrice tapped her red marker against the paper margin. She assumed every line she wrote became the final law of the house. Months turned into years while the filing cabinet drawers grew heavier with receipts, manifests, and quiet observations of the town. Vincent watched us from his chair. He did not interfere with the accounting sessions. His tea grew cold in the ceramic mug. Beatrice ignored him entirely unless she needed a signature on a form for the local municipal tax assessments. The kitchen remained a battleground of margins and totals. The school bus fleet changed models twice over the decade. My route remained remarkably consistent through every seasonal shift. I picked up children who eventually grew tall enough to drive their own cars to the local high school. Some of those former students now worked at the town hall. They waved when my bus passed the brick municipal building during morning shifts. I pulled the visor down during an afternoon run. The clipped manifests formed a thick stack above my head. Each paper proved exactly where I had been and when, locking the daily truth firmly against any convenient fiction. A driver sees everything that happens on every single street. Back at the house, the filing cabinet waited in the narrow hallway. I opened the bottom drawer with the small brass key. Another stack of route logs slid neatly into place beside the tax receipts and the accumulated fuel invoices. The metallic device latched closed with a crisp snap. The record stayed safe until the proper time arrived. Winter returned again with heavy snowstorms. I scraped the ice off the windshield before dawn. The engine roared to life in the driveway. Beatrice slept upstairs while I prepared for the first run. The accumulation of years rested entirely in my hands, waiting quietly for the precise moment when everything would finally balance. The town library added a new wing during those years. I drove past it every Tuesday afternoon at 2. Beatrice spent her afternoons downstairs reviewing spreadsheets with a cold expression. She believed her pencil strokes erased every inconvenient fact from the family ledgers that she controlled with absolute authority. Every single morning route taught me something new about patience. The diesel engine hummed a steady rhythm against the damp, quiet pavement. No argument on any kitchen table could ever alter the mileage logged on the odometer. The hallway air felt cold against my skin. I stood by the gray filing cabinet. My fingers rested on the cold metal handle. The top drawer slid open with a soft metallic scrape. Inside sat the folders I had gathered over the years. Each folder held records of fuel purchases and bus maintenance logs. None of those pages belonged to the family ledger downstairs. Yet the shadow of that ledger hung over every room in the house. Beatrice walked down the hall carrying a small ceramic bowl. She stopped near the doorway and watched my hands. Her shoulders were slightly slumped under her emerald cardigan. She looked tired in the harsh morning light. For a brief second, the sharp edge left her face. She looked less like an absolute ruler and more like a middle-aged woman carrying too much weight. She rubbed her temples with 2 fingers. Her wedding ring clicked softly against her forehead. Her hands were trembling slightly before she dropped them to her sides. "I forgot to take my morning tonic," she said quietly, staring down at the floorboards between us. It was a small human admission that caught me completely off guard. She did not yell or demand anything in that instant. She simply stood there looking small and worn out by her own routines. I did not say anything back to her. I only watched the way her breathing slowed down. Then the moment passed and the familiar stiffness returned to her spine. She adjusted her collar with a sharp jerk of her wrist. "We have to keep the accounts straight," she said, her voice snapping back into its usual defensive rhythm. "That $24,000 was accounted for properly," she added defensively. I pulled out a single manila folder from the stack. The paper felt crisp beneath my calloused fingertips. I opened the tab and reviewed the neatly typed columns of figures. The numbers did not match the story she kept telling in the living room. We simply had to adjust the ledger for unexpected administrative fees, she had written in an earlier memo. Those exact words sat on the page in her precise handwriting. They were words designed to close an argument before it could fully begin. The family law in our house always favored whoever spoke loudest in the room. Vincent remained seated in his corner chair downstairs. He did not look up from the empty wooden armrests. He held his ceramic mug as if it still contained hot coffee. The lie began to strain against the weight of simple arithmetic. A bus route does not tolerate sloppy record-keeping for very long. If a student is missing from a stop, the manifest catches the omission immediately. Real life operates on precise totals rather than convenient stories told to relatives. Beatrice turned away from the doorway without waiting for an answer. Her slippers made a soft shuffling sound against the carpeted floor. I pushed the metal drawer shut until it clicked securely into place. The sound echoed down the quiet hallway. I walked back toward the kitchen to check my morning schedule. The clipboard hung from its nail beside the wooden door frame. 34 stops waited for me out on the paved road. The engine of the bus would be idling by the fence line soon. I grabbed my heavy wool coat from the wall hook. The fabric smelled faintly of diesel fuel and old cedar. I stepped outside into the chilly Kittery air. The morning frost covered the windshield in delicate white patterns. I pulled out my scraper and began clearing the glass. Every stroke of the plastic blade removed another layer of ice. The road ahead was clear and predictable. The paperwork inside my jacket pocket felt heavy against my chest. Every invoice and every signed receipt told a consistent story. The system was waiting for the right moment to balance itself out. I climbed up the metal steps and slid behind the black steering wheel. The diesel engine hummed beneath the floorboards with a steady vibration. I checked the rear-view mirror before releasing the parking brake. The neighborhood houses stood silent behind their trimmed lawns. Nobody else knew what was hidden inside those hallway files. The ledger pages remained locked away downstairs under heavy scrutiny. Beatrice was probably sitting on the floral sofa with her yellow legal pad by now. Vincent was staring out the front window at nothing in particular. The entire household maintained its fragile illusion of complete control, but a fracture had finally appeared along the edge of the official story. The numbers written in ink refused to line up with the explanations. I shifted the heavy vehicle into gear and pulled away from the curb. The first stop of the day was waiting at the corner. My hands gripped the wheel with absolute steadiness. The route manifest was clipped securely to the visor above my head. Every name and every mileage mark fell into its proper place. The day would unfold according to the schedule I held in my hands. Nothing more needed to be said in the house we shared. The work itself would eventually reveal everything that had been kept in the dark. I held the thick folder in my tired hands. The figures stared back at me from the open page. Have you ever caught someone red-handed while they sat comfortably downstairs? Tell me your thoughts below. Drop a line about how you handled it when family treated your daily labor as their personal account. Stay right here with me for the rest of this quiet journey. The final entries are waiting on the desk, and we are going to review every single line together very soon. The envelope sat on the oak kitchen table. The address bore sharp, hurried ink. Inside rested a printed email chain originating directly from the municipal transit offices, detailing every single dollar of the claim. Beatrice had inscribed her signature at the foot of the sheet. She demanded reimbursement for municipal transit expenses. The document bore a specific date and a clear signature. It outlined a claim for $24,000 in supposed route maintenance. I compared the printed email to my route manifests. The dates matched the weeks I drove through freezing rain. Vincent watched us from his corner armchair without moving a single tired muscle in his aged, weathered face while I sat there. He held his cold ceramic mug with both hands. Beatrice entered the room with her green woolen sweater on. She tossed her keys onto the smooth laminate counter with a sharp clatter. You left this paper out where anyone could see it, she said. Her voice carried a sharp edge of defensive irritation that filled the room. My eyes remained fixed on the printed text. The dark ink was fresh and entirely unmistakable, proving beyond any reasonable doubt her direct personal involvement in the missing funds. Every single route log I kept pointed straight back to this exact moment in time. This document belongs in the filing cabinet, I said calmly. Beatrice crossed her arms tightly over her chest. She sneered down at the wooden table's surface. That email was strictly meant for internal administration only, she said, her voice dropping down into a harsh and warning tone. She realized her massive mistake far too late. The physical paper had already spoken for itself. I placed my worn blue route log right beside her printed email. The two competing records sat side by side under the warm pendant light. One record was built on honest miles driven through Kittery, while the other relied entirely on fiction and careless self-incrimination. Vincent shifted his heavy weight slightly in the quiet room. He stared silently at the worn wood grain. The kitchen air grew very cold. Outside the small window, absolute darkness settled over the empty residential streets of Kittery. A single old street lamp flickered against the dirty glass pane. Every single daily entry was backed by fuel receipts and verified mileage numbers collected honestly over decades of hard labor. Beatrice stared at the paper in front of her. Her fingers trembled against the edge of the yellow legal pad. She knew the game was finished. There was no way to rewrite the official municipal record because government servers kept permanent digital copies of everything. The sound was dry and raspy. He looked at Beatrice with a heavy, disappointed expression. You always wrote too much down on paper, he said. After numerous prolonged years of watching in silence, he finally offered his initial direct remark regarding the domestic account book. I gathered my route manifests into a neat stack. The small brass key felt heavy in my apron pocket. Beatrice pulled the incriminating email toward her chest. She wanted to hide the damaging evidence before it could be filed away permanently in the hallway cabinet. The hallway clock ticked away the seconds with steady mechanical precision. I made my way past the living room toward the heavy metal filing cabinet. My boots made a soft thud against the floorboards. She remained seated at the kitchen table, with her head buried deep inside her trembling hands in total silence. The gray metal drawers slid open smoothly on oiled tracks. I slipped the printed email right beside my personal route logs. The dated evidence now rested securely where it belonged. No amount of angry shouting could ever erase what was now securely written down in plain black and white. Morning would arrive soon enough with another long roster of school children waiting patiently for me at the curb. I locked the gray filing cabinet with a firm turn of the small brass key. The old house was quiet at last. The final record was complete. Vincent turned his head toward the dark hallway. He did not say another word about the matter. The shadows stretched long across the faded linoleum floor. Every single person living inside this old house finally understood the undeniable weight of a verifiable daily record. The centennial gathering filled the municipal hall with folding chairs and murmurs. Banners hung across the podium. Citizens of Kittery crowded the aisles to celebrate 30 years of municipal service. Beatrice sat in the front row wearing her emerald silk jacket. She smiled for the town dignitaries who walked past her. I stood near the side entrance with a heavy cardboard box resting against my hip. Inside were 26 years of route manifests, fuel logs, and municipal emails. A bus route doesn't care who you pretend to be on the porch. It only cares who actually boards at the curb. I repeated the old truth in my mind as the program began. The town historian introduced the speakers from the elevated wooden stage. Beatrice adjusted her collar and prepared to accept her plaque for civic contributions. She looked confident under the bright overhead lights. I walked down the central aisle toward the front row. My boots made no sound against the carpeted floor. Several neighbors turned to watch my approach. I placed the cardboard box squarely upon the mahogany table beside the podium. "You left some documents out of the town archive," I said to her in a steady voice. Beatrice turned her head with a sharp expression of annoyance. "This is a public celebration," she said to me through clenched teeth. Vincent stepped forward from the shadows near the rear exit doors. He walked slowly with his wooden cane tapping against the floorboards. His hands trembled slightly as he reached inside his wool coat pocket. He pulled out a folded paper and placed it on top of my box. It was the original maintenance assessment signed 3 years ago. "I brought that from the desk drawer," Vincent said to the room. The murmurs in the audience died down completely. Town officials stopped their whispered conversations near the refreshment table. Beatrice stared at the fragile paper resting on the cardboard container. The handwriting belonged entirely to her. $24,000 appeared clearly in the itemized column beneath her signature. The figures matched every municipal transit email stored in my office filing cabinet. "We needed to settle this account before the town council adjourned," I said to the gathered crowd. Beatrice stood up from her folding chair with a rigid posture. Her face lost all its color under the stage lights. The local reporter aimed a small camera toward the front table. Vincent stood quietly beside my shoulder without offering any further defense for her. He simply steadied himself against the edge of the mahogany podium. A hand-stitched quilt draped over the nearby display rack caught the afternoon light. It reminded me of long winter nights spent cutting fabric scraps while keeping the household books balanced. "This audit covers 3 fiscal terms of administrative overreach," I said to the council members. The records spoke for themselves. The silence in the hall stretched outward until it filled every quiet corner of the large room. Beatrice reached for her yellow leather folder with shaking fingers. She tried to slide the documents beneath her empty coffee mug. The town clerk stepped forward to inspect the itemized ledger sheets. Nobody rushed to rescue her from the weight of her own paperwork. The town clerk adjusted his heavy wire-rimmed glasses. He read the top line of the maintenance invoice. "This total matches the municipal budget allocation for Kittery Road repairs," he said to the quiet room. Beatrice stared blankly at the polished wooden table. Her emerald silk jacket seemed too bright for the dimming afternoon light filtering through the high windows. She opened her mouth to speak in her defense. No sound came out of her dry throat. Vincent lowered his weary gaze toward the patterned floorboards. His polished wooden cane rested firmly against his knee. I stood quietly beside the textile display rack near the side wall. The hand-stitched quilt caught the amber light from the tall municipal windows. Every square of fabric represented a bitter winter of careful measuring and silent labor. My mother pieced those faded colors together while keeping the household tallies in strict order. Beatrice never learned how to mend a torn seam. She only knew how to cut away what did not suit her personal comfort. The council members leaned forward together in their folding chairs. They looked from the printed transit emails to the signed assessment papers with mounting concern. The evidence needed no grand speech to explain its underlying meaning. The paper trail was long and entirely unbroken. $24,000 was missing from the transit ledger across the last 3 fiscal terms. The council president cleared his dry throat. "We will need an immediate formal accounting of these municipal funds," he said to the crowded assembly. Beatrice finally found her voice. "This audit is completely flawed," she said with a sharp edge. Nobody in the hall believed her sudden defense. The route manifests and fuel logs rested on the dark mahogany surface like heavy stones. I reached down and touched the cardboard edge of the box. My fingers brushed against the blue-covered notebook resting underneath. Every single address and schedule was logged with absolute precision. A school bus driver knows every family's schedule because the children are never late at the curb. Beatrice sat down hard in her metal folding chair. The plastic feet clicked sharply against the wooden floor. Vincent slowly turned toward the double exit doors. He did not look back at his daughter once. He walked out into the cool Kittery afternoon with steady, deliberate steps. I gathered the cardboard box securely into my arms. The familiar weight felt solid and steady against my chest. The public anniversary celebration continued in hushed murmurs around the edges of the large hall. I walked past the row of watching dignitaries toward the main exit. The heavy door opened to the wide street outside. My yellow bus was parked down the block, ready for the afternoon run. 20 children would be waiting at their respective street corners when 3 o'clock arrived. They did not care about municipal ledgers or public family disputes. They only cared about getting home safely before dark. I adjusted the cardboard box against my shoulder and kept walking forward. The kitchen was quiet. Beatrice sat at the wooden table. Her hands rested over her yellow legal pad. A heavy emerald wool pullover hung slackly over her slender frame as she gazed vacantly at the empty wooden table, anticipating a ferocious outburst of rage. The cardboard box sat on the counter. It held every manifest from 26 years of driving local children, every route, every fuel receipt, every signed docket. The evidence was absolute. I could easily have brought all these heavy paper files directly to the municipal authorities waiting downtown this very morning. That was not my doing. Revenge requires an audience and a willingness to stay trapped in the same small room. It requires energy I simply did not possess. Beatrice wanted a fight. She desperately wanted me to scream aloud, to demand financial restitution, and to drag our messy family business into public view. I denied her that satisfaction entirely. Vincent watched from his usual corner. He held his wooden cane firmly across his knees. His old eyes tracked my movements. He said nothing at all. The heavy, uncomfortable silence between us stretched completely across the cold linoleum floor without a single sign of interruption. I placed the small brass key gently on the laminate counter. Upon stepping through the rear exit, I noticed the academic transport idling silently at the roadside. The heavy engine idled softly in the morning light. Its diesel breath rose steadily in the crisp autumn air. My official route manifest was already clipped securely right above the metal visor, waiting for the morning run. The children depended on the schedule. The road ahead was completely clear. I climbed into the tall driver's seat. My hands found the familiar wooden steering wheel. The heavy air brake hissed softly against the floor. I carefully shifted the heavy bus transmission gear into forward drive and left the complicated past entirely behind us. I pulled away smoothly. Driving was the only absolute truth I needed. All of the mailboxes stood precisely where they belonged. Every driveway was measured in feet and seconds. The town woke up slowly around the rolling bus. Tall streetlights clicked off one by one as the cold gray dawn finally broke across the sleeping town. I checked my side mirrors carefully. Letting go was never about forgiveness. This represented merely a bureaucratic termination of a troubled account. I closed the ledger on their petty household rules permanently. That heavy metal filing cabinet could simply rust completely shut for all I cared while I kept moving forward today. My time belonged to the open highway. Some debts are simply not worth collecting. They cost far more than the original principal ever did. I left the papers right there on the laminate counter. Let them figure out all of their own complicated financial balance sheets entirely without any further help from me. My bus engine hummed a steady tune. The first stop was just down the street. A small young boy in a bright blue jacket stood waiting quite eagerly by the old metal post box. He waved happily when he saw the bright headlights cutting through the morning. I slowed to a gentle halt. Life continued forward without a single backward sound. The kitchen settled into an ordinary and peaceful rhythm. Vincent placed his ceramic mug on the wooden counter without spilling a single drop of tea. He pulled a small wooden stool toward the lower pantry shelves with steady hands. This minor act of amends came from someone who held his tongue for an extended period. He did not offer an elaborate apology or a speech about the past. The wooden floorboards creaked softly beneath his slippers as he moved. Instead, he reached into the dark back of the corner cupboard and pulled out a heavy fabric bundle. A hand-stitched quilt rested across his forearms in the dim morning light. Our mother had sewn those geometric patterns during long winter evenings at this exact table. Every colored square represented a deliberate choice of thread and durable cotton backing. Vincent looked over his shoulder and offered a quiet nod toward the patterned cloth. The intricate stitching held together decades of family history without a single loose thread. "She made this for the front room long before the Ledgers took over," he said quietly. His voice was thin and steady in the calm morning air. I took the folded bundle from his hands and spread the fabric across the back of the floral armchair. The blue and green squares fit neatly over the worn upholstery. Vincent sat down very slowly and rested his palms against the soft woolen weave. A faint sense of order finally filled the room. The morning bus schedule demanded my attention before the sun cleared the eastern fence line. I pulled my blue uniform jacket over my shoulders and walked through the back door. The school bus engine idled smoothly in the gravel driveway. I clipped the fresh morning route manifest to the visor above the steering wheel. 20 children would board at various curbside stops before the 7 o'clock bell. The yellow body of the vehicle reflected the early morning light. Every address on that paper was real and accurately accounted for. The fuel receipts from Tuesday sat inside the metal box on the counter. Beatrice stayed upstairs behind the closed door of the master bedroom. She did not come down for coffee or check her yellow legal pads. I turned the ignition key and checked the rearview mirrors for traffic. The dashboard clock glowed green in the quiet cab. No fraudulent invoices waited in the incoming mail basket by the front entryway. I shifted the heavy transmission into drive and released the mechanical handbrake. The rubber tires crunched over the small stones in the driveway. The town library passed by on the left corner at exactly 2 o'clock. My route logs remained locked securely inside the hallway filing cabinet drawers. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the paved road ahead of the bus. The road ahead required steady navigation and nothing more. Every passenger who boarded the vehicle paid their proper fare through honest labor. You might spend years waiting for someone to finally admit the tall columns were wrong. I did not wait for an apology that would never come. Vincent left the hand-stitched blue and green geometric quilt resting safely on the floral armchair. Beatrice stayed behind her closed wooden door with her quiet papers. I walked out past the front porch into the cool air. A road only asks who moves forward when the morning breaks. It cares nothing for the stories people shout from their doorsteps. You can build an entire life on steady motion instead of loud demands. My daily route manifest clipped firmly to the visor above. The engine turned over quietly in the early dawn. I shifted the heavy transmission into first gear without hesitation. The school bus exhaled a long sigh of compressed air at the first corner stop. The digital dashboard clock blinked silently in the pale morning light. My morning coffee sat untouched on the metal cup holder, slowly cooling beside the steering wheel.